Sudha is a connector, an organizer, network facilitator, strategist, and movement builder. As the CEO of SVP International, where she just celebrated her 1-year anniversary, she brings her cross-sector and systems change leadership to our global network of over 3,500 philanthropists, nonprofit leaders, and advocates, advancing social change in our communities. This evening, Sudha will share her insights and some inspiration, focusing on the power of the global SVP network to reimagine our systems towards a more just post-COVID-19 world, how individual donors can play a role in advancing systems change and justice, and why being a part of SVP is more important now than ever before, what SVP International is doing right now, and how we're leveraging our work together. So some of you might know that I'm a member of the SVPI Board of Directors. And in this role, I have the opportunity to spend a lot of time with Sudha. I get to hear her insights and her thinking on a regular basis. And one of the things that I most appreciate is her ability to find opportunity in challenge and to leverage SVP's existing strengths to create a new future that brings about the vision that we have long dreamt about. Welcome, Sudha.
Thank you, Sierra, for that really lovely introduction. And thank you to SVP Tucson for having me with you tonight. You know, I was so looking forward to being with all of you in person for this and getting some sunshine, because I'm up here in Seattle where it is gray and cold. But I'm gonna literally rain check that opportunity and hope to meet many of you in person in the coming months. So Sierra asked me to share a little bit about what I'm seeing from my vantage point while leading this global network in the midst of this moment that we find ourselves in. And what I say here is probably no surprise to many of you. This crisis has really brought to light for so many that we do need new systems. We've had evidence for decades that we need to build a different world and that the path that we were on was unsustainable. But this crisis has really brought a sharp focus to that need and has magnified the inequalities and the inequities of our world. So yes, this is a global shared experience in us all being physically distant from each other, but it is not a moment that we are all experiencing equally. So for 2 decades, for those of you who don't know SVP International, we are the network that has been connecting SVPs around the world together. And whenever someone wants to start a new SVP, we're the folks who help make that happen. And over those 2 decades, SVP, the collective, has come to be known for engaged philanthropy and nonprofit capacity building. And we've already known over the last several years that to remain relevant and useful to social change, that we needed to continue to evolve with the changing times. Now we see that's even more true, and the need for us to figure out what our work looks like in this moment is heightened. In Tucson, you've all already begun to pave the way, taking a multi-generational approach, leaning into systems change, and building strategic partnerships that increase your community capacity, not just one nonprofit at a time, but really looking at the community writ large. And really being able to share power and recognize that the expertise exists not just in one of us who is the philanthropist or who is the business person, but that the expertise rests in all of us. And that sort of perspective is so critical right now, but it's also critical for our future. So when I think about networks, I think a lot about scale. We need to make sure that the work that you're doing in Tucson and that others are doing across our 44 affiliates in 8 countries is connected, and that we're finding threads of alignment for innovating together. You know, I think one of the things that's really struck me about right now is that it is so clear we cannot go it alone, that we are really in a globalized world. And so what happens in India or in Japan or in LA or SVP Cleveland or SVP Vancouver matters not just to those places, but it has to matter to all of us. Because the reality is that even as we've seen in our economies, the work that we do on every single aspect of our lives is inextricably linked. And a healthy ecosystem requires connections, learning, and communities that are local, regional, and global. And our work, I mentioned this as I started, it also requires us to think about power. And the question I ask is, what is the power of 3,500 philanthropists around the globe right now? What can we do together, and how can we rapidly advance systems change and disrupt the way philanthropy has operated as usual? In times of stress, what we know is that systems go back to what they were built to do. And our systems were built to maintain the power of those who already have it. And so it will take all of us really leaning in to ensure that the work to come and the future to come centers equitable and justice-based approaches. We have to look for ways to build power and be in solidarity with those on the front lines, not just for this immediate crisis, but for so many global challenges that we all care about. Climate crisis, fighting for gender justice, ending income inequality, and so many more. More than ever, what I think is that it's time for us to do this work together. Collective action matters. It's easy also, as systems go back to their old ways, to think that, the way for us to go forward is through rugged individualism, quiet contributions, really staying above the fray. But these are our communities that we are building, right? We are all part of these communities. And by being part of your local SVP, you're saying that the collective matters, and you're taking a stand for something really challenging in many ways to many parts of our system. We want to make sure that when someone thinks, how do I make impact? Or if they move to Tucson, that they ask the question, how do I connect to my community? That they know that SVP is the place where they can have a trusted viewpoint into an ecosystem to know how to be proximate, accountable, and make real impact. That is a viewpoint that is hard to get without help and without real connections. And that's the viewpoint that your collective in SVP gives you. And that's why engaged philanthropy is more important now than ever before. Networks matter. For you locally in Tucson, that you all create a really robust network so you have eyes on what the system looks like and you have eyes on what needs exist in your community and also how you can be really effectively part of that. But also it has to scale up from there so that we have eyes across the globe in understanding how our work can have impact. And ultimately, this is because the new systems we're trying to build, those are about being in the collective. So we have to model it now and at every single scale. And I really believe that it is really only with that cross-sector, multiracial, multi-community, multinational solutions that we'll be able to build this new world. One of the things that's really clear to me as I've spent time traveling prior to all of this, I spent a lot of time on the road traveling to all the different SVPs. And what I've seen is that SVP is in every community positioned for so much. And right now in this time, we are really positioned to make a huge impact. We're cross-sector, we have those local and global connections, we are social change leaders, we are philanthropists, we are part of philanthropy, but we're not institutional philanthropy, so we have some nimbleness. We have the ability to see the whole ecosystem, and we have the opportunity to ask and answer, what does it mean to practice philanthropy as an act of solidarity? And in answering that, the thing that comes to mind for me is that now is the time for reimagination and building resilience. Because as we look to create a new paradigm, it's in the tiny moments, the connections, the learnings, the ideas that happen through networked approaches that we will find solutions. Not by having everyone do the same thing or having everyone recreate the same wheel or even by having everyone band together to make one big wheel. No, resilience in my mind calls for us to imagine a world that is really human and relational, and that's our scale. An ecosystem really requires diversity. I'm a little bit of a biology nerd, so I like to use metaphors from the ecosystem world. And What I think often about is that a relationship is made, or a rainforest is made up of a series of relationships between the understory and the treetops. But it's also made up of frogs and bugs and birds and so many different plants and animals that all knit together into a really rich and powerful ecosystem. And that's really true of our social change world as well. So it's with that ecosystem approach in mind that SVP International is really staying focused on how we lead our network in this moment for greater impact. When I'm out talking with the foundation leaders at Ford and Rockefeller and Rakes and so many others, they're all focused on the same question. How do we use our power now to make our communities more resilient for the long haul? And how do we do that in a way that builds our global connections? So that's why at the network level, we want to make sure that what we are doing is both about amplifying what's happening on the ground, like what all of you are doing in Tucson, and that we're also looking at opportunities to catalyze more resources into our network to those cross-sector issues, demonstrate disruption for more proximity and accountability, and show a new way of doing philanthropy. And really inspire philanthropy, inspire philanthropists in this moment to be centered on what communities need most and to give even more in a time, not just for the immediate crisis, but also to build that long-term resilience. So one of the things, just that I am really sitting with and thinking a lot about is that it is time for those of us who have wealth to use the power and influence that comes with that to create a new future. Because we know that it is only together, working across our power differences, across systems, across sectors, that we can breathe into life, a new world where all our communities can thrive. Thanks.
Thank you, Sudha. I know I said this in the intro, but your leadership truly inspires me and it motivates our work here in Tucson. And I really love seeing the alignment between a direction that we've been talking about moving on in Tucson for a couple of years now and the direction that the SVP network is moving in. And so I want to just ask you one final question before we move on this evening. And that is, there are so many things that are happening in our world right now. And what is the one thing that you would encourage our partners and all of us on this call today to be thinking more deeply on?
It's a great question, Sierra. Thank you. I think it really is this question of power. And it's been such a conversation in North American institutional philanthropy for the last several years. Who has power? How are we sharing power? But I think a lot about, as individuals, the opportunity for us to be asking that question of ourselves, and not just asking that on an individual scale, but also asking that on a collective. So as SVP, where do we have power and leverage? And in my network, where do I have power and leverage? And how am I bringing that all to bear towards this moment of reimagining a new future, one that is more resilient, one where our communities do thrive, where we don't have this, sort of huge magnification of inequities in a crisis, but rather our communities are already resilient and able to make their way through a crisis because we as philanthropists, as social change leaders, have done everything in our power to ensure that future instances, future challenges, our communities are ready and they can weather these storms with us, right? So I think that to me is the big thing. Like, how can we have eyes on power and how can we see clearly what that power looks like by being part of a network and part of a collective?
Well, thank you again. I would encourage everyone to clap your hands, even though we won't hear you. But I'm certainly clapping here. And I just want to say that there's so much I love about what you said. But what I'm taking with me right now is this idea of all of us collectively reimagining a new future, a more resilient future, and one where our community thrives. So thank you so much, Sudha.